Welcome back to another episode of Smooth Brain EDH, where we make the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. We have another exciting episode for you all this week with some of our personal decks. First up is Dustin on Kruphix, God of Horizons. This is a blue-green ramp deck hoping to store mana over its turns with Kruphix's ability to power out huge Eldrazi. His opening hand has an island, a forest, a crumbling vestige, a Simic Signet, Cultivate, Kozilek's Channeler, and an Endbringer. Next up is Chandler on Arcades the Strategist. This is a walled tribal deck, hoping to play walls, draw some cards, and close up the game with a lot of damage and or a few game-winning combos. His opening hand has a Prismatic Vista, Misty Rainforest, Access Tunnel, Birds of Paradise, Flumph, Rhystic Study, and Heroic Intervention. Third is Ethan on Octavia, Living Thesis. This is a mono blue deck, hoping to draw a bunch of cards, fill the graveyard with instants and sorceries, and then turn little small creatures into powerful 8/8s to beat his opponents down. His opening hand has an island, a brainstorm, an obsessive search, peak, reality shift, slip through space, and scuttle tide. Last up is Shelby on Niv Mizzet Perun. This is a blue-red combo control deck, hoping to use Niv's ability to draw a bunch of cards and find a game-winning combo to close the game out. His hand has a Mountain, Frostboil Snarl, Jeweled Lotus, Harmonic Prodigy, Jorian Ruin Diver, Megas of the Wheel, and Argent the Shifting Flame. As always, deck lists are in the description. While you're down there, go ahead and leave us a comment on who you hope will win this episode. Now, on to the gameplay.
With Dustin going first, he plays a forest and passes to Chandler. Chandler will play and crack his Misty Rainforest, taking 1, and he'll find a tropical island to the battlefield, tap it for 1, and cast his Birds of Paradise before passing to Ethan. Ethan will play his island and pass to Shelby. Shelby will play his top-decked Urza's Saga and get its first ability. He'll then cast a Jeweled Lotus for free and pass the turn to Dustin. Dustin will play an island as land for turn, tap for 2, cast Simic Signet, and then pass the turn to Chandler. Chandler will play a Plains as land for turn, tap for 3, and cast his Rhystic Study, which is a pretty good turn 2 play. And Ethan would like to respond by casting Peek targeting Chandler. Ethan will look at Chandler's hand, draw a card, and then Rhystic Study will resolve. Chandler will then pass the turn, and Ethan will play an island as land for turn, then tap for 2 to cast an Ornithopter of Paradise, and Chandler will draw a card. Ethan will then pass the turn to Shelby, and Urza's Saga will progress at the beginning of his turn. Shelby will then play his Snarl and reveal a mountain so it comes in untapped. After this, he'll tap for 2 to cast his Harmonic Prodigy, Chandler will draw a card off of this, and then Dustin will have the turn passed to him. And Dustin will start off with a forest as land for turn. He'll then tap for 3 to cast a Cultivate and will pay the 1. He'll find an island to the battlefield tapped, and a forest to his hand. Dustin will then relinquish the turn to Chandler. And Chandler will play a Tundra as land for turn. And with nothing better to do, Chandler decides to cast Arcades and then pass the turn to Ethan. And Ethan is getting really lucky off this one land hand. He'll play an island as land for turn. After this, he'll tap for 2 and cast a Scuttle Tide, and he will pay the 1. He'll pass the turn to Shelby after this, and Urza's Saga will reach its final phase. Shelby will sacrifice it and find a Soul Ring to the battlefield. He'll then tap for 3 mana, 2 colorless and 1 red, and cast Dockside Extortionist, and pay for Rhystic Study with that 1 floating. It resolves, and he'll get 4 treasure tokens from this. He'll tap for red with his Snarl, and 2 treasure tokens, then tap for 3 blue with his Jeweled Lotus to cast Niv Mizzet. On turn 3, Ethan will respond by casting a Brainstorm before Niv Mizzet hits the battlefield, and he will not pay the 1. After the Brainstorm resolves, Niv Mizzet will too. Shelby will then sacrifice his last 2 treasures to cast a Lightning Greaves, and will not pay the 1. Harmonic Prodigy will get a Prowess trigger. Shelby will then equip Niv Mizzet with the Greaves, swing 5 at Ethan, and then swing Harmonic Prodigy at Dustin. Shelby will then pass the turn to Dustin, and Dustin will play a forest as land for turn, tap for 5 mana, plus 1 to pay for Rhystic Study, and cast Kruphix. He'll then pass the turn to Chandler. Chandler will play an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn. Then tap for 2 and cast a Wall of Lost Thoughts. He definitely doesn't want to mill Ethan, but doesn't know between Shelby and Dustin, so he rolls for it. The dice chooses Dustin, and Dustin will mill 4.
Oh, my Planter Bridge. My Cokes from the Blinds. My unexpected results. My Decimator. Shame.
And after Dustin mills 4 cards, Chandler will draw to Arcades. Chandler will then cast his Flumph, draw a card off Arcades, and then stare at Shelby. He'll then move to combat and swing 3 Vigilance in the air at Shelby, then pass the turn to Ethan, and he has to discard 2 lands and a generous gift on his cleanup. On Ethan's turn, he'll pay 1 to cast Wizard class and then pay 1 to Rhystic Study. He'll then play a tapped Seagate as land for turn, and then pass the turn to Shelby, and Chandler begins to conspire a bit with Shelby before his turn starts. On Shelby's draw step, Niv will trigger twice. He'll deal 1 to Chandler, add 1 to Chandler's Flump. Chandler will draw a card off of his Flump, and have Shelby draw 1 again. Niv will then double trigger again, he'll hit Flump once, and Ethan's Ornithopter. Chandler chooses the same draw targets, and Niv will double trigger yet again. He'll pick Flump again, and kill Ethan's Ornithopter. Chandler then picks the same draw targets, and Shelby, not wanting to kill the Flump, hits Chandler's Birds of Paradise and Dustin's face, and Chandler feels a little bit betrayed by this. But all in all, they both got to Ancestral Recall off of a 2-mana creature. Finally, on his main phase, Shelby will play an island. He'll then move his Lightning Greaves over to his Harmonic Prodigy, then taps for 3 to cast a Tandem Lookout, not realizing that Soul Bond ignores Shroud, and Shelby does not pay the 1. Chandler asks what that card does, and Shelby says it's a Curiosity effect, so Chandler thinks it's an enchantment, so he attempts to Fierce Guardianship it. But, as we all know, that can't happen. But don't worry, everybody quickly realizes that mistake, and now everybody knows that Chandler has a Fierce Guardianship. Luckily though, Ethan has a response as well, and he will Reality Shift Niv Mizzet. Shelby will get to draw 2 and then deal 4 damage. He decides to kill Flump and then deal 1 to everyone's face. And this time, Chandler will let Dustin draw. Shelby then gets to manifest the top card of his library, which he later reveals to be Enter the Infinite. He then equips his Lookout with his Greaves, then casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, and equips him with the Greaves. He also does not pay the 1 to Ragavan, and when Ragavan enters, he will Soul Bond it. Shelby will then move to combat and swing Ragavan at Ethan, and then swing 2 more at Dustin. They'll both take it, and Ethan exiles a Flood of Recollection off the top of his library, and Shelby will make a treasure token. He'll also get a Soul Bond draw, and after all of this, Shelby will pass the turn to Dustin, and Dustin starts his turn off with a basic forest. He'll then tap for 3 and cast an Awakening Zone, and he does pay the 1. He'll then pass the turn to Chandler. Chandler will play Access Tunnel as land for turn, and then cast 3 visits to go find a Savannah to the battlefield untapped. He'll then tap for 4 more to cast a Smothering Tithe, making sure everybody has a lot to pay for during their turns. He'll then swing 3 more Commander at Shelby, and then cast a Shield Sphere to draw another card off Arcades. He'll then move to cleanup and discard Overgrown Battlements, Kodama's Reach, and Drift of Phantasms. Now on Ethan's turn, he will not pay for Smothering Tithe during his draw step, and Ethan will just pass the turn to Shelby, and Shelby will not pay for Smothering Tithe. He'll then move straight to combat, swing Ragavan and 2 more damage at Dustin, and then 4 at Ethan. Dustin exiles an Eye of Ugin from the top, and Shelby will make another treasure token, and draw 2 cards off of Soul Bond. He'll then play an Exotic Orchard as land for turn, and then tap completely out and sacrifice all of his treasures to cast Niv Mizzet again, and he cannot pay the 1 to Rhystic Study. With the Tandem Lookout still out, Ethan decides he has to try to dig, and he lets Chandler know he's not going to be paying for Smothering Tithe or Rhystic Study for any of this. He taps for 3 and casts a Frantic Search. He draws 2 and discards Obsessive Search and Think Twice, and then untaps 3 lands. He will Madness cast Obsessive Search to draw a card, and when priority comes back around to Ethan again, Niv Mizzet will resolve. But thankfully, with Ethan casting all those spells, he drew Chandler into a response. So, when Soul Bond triggers, Chandler decides to go ahead and get rid of the Tandem Lookout for good, and cast Path to Exile. This will still allow Shelby to draw 2 cards and ping Chandler's face for 4, which he does, and Chandler will make 2 more treasure tokens. Shelby will then find a tapped island to the battlefield, move the Greaves over to Niv Mizzet, and with nothing left to do, he'll pass the turn to Dustin, who floats 3 mana on his end step. And Shelby also has to discard 4 cards. On his upkeep, Dustin will get an Eldrazi spawn and pay for Smothering Tithe. He'll then play a Flooded Grove as land for turn. Dustin thinks for quite a while, and has an Expropriate in hand that he wants to cast, but he knows Chandler has a Fierce Guardianship, and he has no way to protect it from that. He also has a few creatures in hand he wants to play, but Chandler also threatened a board wipe at the end of Shelby's last turn. So he just passes the turn. Let's see if that was the right call. And Chandler starts his turn off with a Yavi Maya. Then taps for 3 to cast a Slaughter the Strong. Looks like Dustin made a pretty good call. Shelby will get to draw 2 off of this, but also kills Chandler's Wall of Lost Thoughts. But Shelby still loses Niv Mizzet and his Morph off of this exchange. After this, Chandler will tap for 3 and cast Heliod. Then sacrifice 2 treasures to cast Stalwart Shield Bearers. He'll then pay 2 mana to give his Shield Sphere lifelink and swing that 8 power butt at Shelby, and Arcades at Dustin. After this, Chandler will pass the turn to Ethan, and Ethan will stop him on his end step to flashback a Think twice. He won't be able to pay for Rhystic Study or Smothering Tithe. Now at the beginning of Ethan's turn, Chandler will miss the Smothering Tithe trigger. Ethan will then play an island as land for turn. After this, he'll level up Wizard class to draw 2 cards, and Chandler will make 2 treasures from this. And then Ethan will pass the turn to Shelby. And Shelby will start out by re-equipping his Greaves to his Monkey Man. He then swings at Ethan for 3, and Ethan will take it. Ethan will exile an Ancient Tomb off the top of his library, and Shelby remembers to make his treasure in the future. He then taps for 5 mana and casts a Mana Geyser to make 10 red mana. And the table lets it resolve, and he doesn't pay the 1 to Rhystic Study. He'll use 7 of this mana and his 3 blue lands to recast Niv Mizzet for 10 mana. He'll then cast his Talisman of Creativity and not pay for Rhystic Study, even though he has a floating mana. Shelby will then attempt to re-equip his Greaves, but Ethan decides to cast Rapid Hybridization, targeting Niv Mizzet. Ethan doesn't pay the 1. Niv Mizzet will draw Shelby 2 more cards, and Shelby will deal the 4 to Ethan's face, and Chandler will make 2 more treasures. He then taps his Talisman to cast a Brainstorm, drawing 2 off Niv Mizzet, dealing 4 to Chandler, and he does pay the 1 this time. Shelby will then draw 3 and put 2 back, and deal 6 to Ethan. Chandler will make 5 more treasures off Shelby casting Brainstorm. He'll then cast a free Fierce Guardianship to draw 2 more cards and deal 4 more to Chandler. And Chandler will make, you guessed it, 2 more treasures. And Shelby cannot pay 1 to this. Rapid Hybrid will get countered, and the Greaves equip will resolve. Shelby will then pass the turn to Dustin, discard 2 cards, and Dustin will float 8 mana. And at the beginning of Dustin's turn, he'll pay for Smothering Tithe and make another spawn. He'll then cast a Zendikar Resurgent, and most certainly pay the 1. Then play his Crumbling Vestige, naming blue. He'll then cast a Thran Dynamo, again paying the 1. Then casts a Kozilek's Channeler, also paying the 1. When he does, he'll draw a card to Zendikar Resurgent, and does not pay the 2 to Chandler. Dustin will then pass the turn to Chandler, and on Dustin's end step, Chandler will sacrifice 7 treasure tokens and overload a Cyclonic Rift. Shelby will draw 2 and ping Chandler for 4, but other than that, nobody has any responses, and everybody picks up their boards, and Chandler will also make 2 treasure tokens. Now on Chandler's turn, he makes a very surprised face as he peels the top card of his library, and casts an Eladamri's Call. Ethan shows a lose focus that he is not able to cast, and Chandler finds and reveals a Walking Ballista. And with that, everybody picks up their boards, and Chandler shows his Fierce Guardianship and Heroic Intervention Protection backup. And so, while it wasn't the wall beatdown plan Chandler was hoping for, he is still the winner of this week's video. Well guys, what'd you think? That game was pretty all over the place. Chandler and Ethan had to keep a close eye on Shelby's Niv Mizzet deck to keep it from going off a couple times there. And Chandler definitely got an edge in the game by getting that turn 2 Rhystic Study down. It drew him a lot of cards. And that mid-game Smothering Tithe created a lot of mana too. And unfortunately for Dustin, the knowledge of that Fierce Guardianship kept him from casting that Expropriate. But I wonder how the game could have gone if it had managed to resolve. But once again guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget to follow us on social media, links will be in the description with the deck lists. And as always everybody, have a smooth day.